busy Peacock Alley that we come to you live and direct from tonight. Not quite as busy as last night. There were 2-hour waits last night, and people waited. That's how good the food is at the Peacock Alley tonight. It's Wine Down Wednesday, which means bottles of wine are half off, so good reason to join us if you are around Bismarck, Mandan, to the Peacock Alley Grill and Bar, 422 East Main Avenue in the historic Patterson Building in downtown Bismarck. We welcome you to another edition of the Legislature Today radio show. Tonight's broadcast brought to you in part by the University of Mary, America's Leadership University. Also thank our hospitality sponsor, the Expressway Inn and Suites of Bismarck. You know, the Expressway hotels are near everything worth being near. Off I-94, exit 156 or exit 161, just 3 minutes from the airport, 3 blocks from the Civic Center, across from Kirkwood Shopping Mall, adjacent to the downtown area. So when in Bismarck, check out Luxury for Less at the Expressway Inn of Bismarck and the Expressway Inn Suites as well, and also that newly expanded and remodeled Expressway Lounge at the Expressway Suites of Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, Dale Wetzel is here, managing editor of the Legislature Today radio show, who has a question for me. What was that, Dale?
I was going to say you should mention that you stay at the Expressway Suites. So
I do indeed.
It's not, or the Expressway Inn, I should say. So it's not. He's not just, promoting the Expressway Inn because they paid us money. Scott likes to stay there.
It's my home away from home.
It's his home away from home.
Well, in Bismarck.
Another thing, you mentioned a 2-hour wait. I mean, if I could stay in a bar like this for 2 hours waiting for anything, I would. So it's not like a 2-hour wait is an imposition at the Peacock Alley.
I don't want to scare you off because it was a bit of an unusual, obviously, night last night to have those kind of waits, but it just tells you any restaurant where you'll wait 2 hours to eat tells you it's a pretty good restaurant.
Especially if it's in Bismarck, North Dakota. That means it's outstanding.
Worth the wait. So anyway, and hope you get a chance to take it in. If not tonight, any night here at the Peacock. Anyway, what happened in the legislature today, Dale?
Well, there's a couple of bills I wanted to dwell on. First of them, the first one is an attempt to raise the North Dakota minimum wage. Actually, what this bill would do would be to index the minimum wage to inflation every year. There would be an increase in the minimum wage every year depending on whether the inflation rate merited it. Right now, North Dakota's minimum wage is $7.25. That's the same as the federal minimum. And I think it's fair to say that most folks, especially in the big cities, are not being paid the minimum wage. They're being paid more than that. And so the argument might be, okay, it's easy to raise. There's no pain in raising the minimum wage because everyone's being paid more than that. No harm. No, there's nothing wrong with it. What the argument might be from the other side is that the minimum wage may be something that is more common in rural North Dakota where the wages are lower and maybe the competition for labor is less intense. But we will see if that has legs. I mean, this does not advocate an increase in the North Dakota minimum wage other than an adjustment for inflation every year. There are some states that have a minimum wage that is higher than the federal minimum, quite a bit higher. There have been debates in the legislature in previous years about a concept called the living wage, which is essentially fixed according to the cost of living for a family of 4 that requires certain amenities. But this would raise the minimum wage every year according to inflation. And right now, the Department of Labor has the authority to revisit the question of what the state minimum wage is every year. But it hasn't done that for quite some time because, frankly, the officialdom in North Dakota is fairly comfortable with keeping the federal minimum wage. And we'll just see what kind of legs this bill has. I mean, it is a Democratic-sponsored bill. There are 8 Democrats on it. There are no Republicans. The primary sponsor is Fargo Representative Steve Zeiser of Fargo. We also had a rather interesting bit of legislation that would set aside $10 million for a film promotion fund. And this money would be taken from the Tobacco Settlement Trust Fund, and I'll tell you what that is in a moment. But the film fund would concentrate upon aiding the production of films about recipients of the Theodore Roosevelt Rough Rider Award. And there's a number of those, as you know, some of them, Phil Jackson, the former coach of the Los Angeles Lakers and the Chicago Bulls. I have Larry Wywoody, who's a famous novelist and poet. Recently, we've had R.D. Offutt, a businessman in eastern North Dakota.
Former university presidents. Dr. Tom Clifford is one I can think of off the top of my head.
Indeed, Dr. Tom Clifford. And also
Doug Burgum.
Doug Burgum. And what I was going to sneak in is Bill Marseal Sr.
That's right.
The owner of, the chairman of Forum Communications, which is frankly, the most significant media company in North Dakota.
My former boss, I was in the room when he received the award. It was a total surprise. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I'm glad it was a total surprise to him. Anyway.
Those are the best ones, don't you think, when it's a surprise?
Well, I question whether it was really a surprise. I think he was acting. But
we'll save that debate for another day. But the idea of this fund then would be to tell their stories on film, basically?
Well, it would be to provide the financing to do that. I mean, that's the implication of the language of the bill. It would come from the Tobacco Settlement Trust Fund, which was created in 1999 after attorneys general in 46 states, including North Dakota, and our current U.S. Senator Heidi Heitkamp was the attorney general at that time. Negotiated a settlement with the four largest tobacco companies in the United States at the time, essentially to compensate states for their costs in medical treatment and care of people who smoke. The theory is that there is a certain taxpayer cost that is imposed by people who use tobacco, and that the tobacco companies should pay for this. Well, North Dakota, at the time, it was estimated North Dakota would get approximately $866 million over 25 years from this settlement. That amount's going to be a bit lower because smoking has declined, and the payments are pegged to tobacco usage to some extent. But the question will become, right now, the tobacco settlement money is divided primarily amongst funds that benefit schools, benefit water projects, benefit health projects. There's also a segment, there's also a segment that's put aside strictly for tobacco control and prevention. This was done because of an initiated measure that was spearheaded by Heidi Heitkamp a few years ago. And so the question becomes, is it an appropriate use of tobacco settlement funds to finance motion picture production, whatever the subject may be? And I suspect that will be one of the big debates of it. And also, there's $10 million is a pretty good chunk of change for film promotion in North Dakota. I mean, film promotion in North Dakota kind of got a jolt back in whenever it was that Dances with Wolves was made, the Kevin Costner film that showed him cavorting with buffalo in South Dakota.
That led to Woolly Boys, right?
Yeah,
is that before or after?
Well, Woolly Boys is after.
Yeah, okay.
Much after.
Anyway, that'll be an interesting one to follow to see what happens there, to see if that funds end up going there. And certainly the Rough Rider Awards, if you've not been to the Capitol, it's fascinating to walk the hallways there and see the portraits and read the stories of all those storied Rough Rider recipients, for sure.
You'll notice that they've gotten too long. The little plaques, the people who got in first, they had nice, brief little summaries of their careers. Now you have something that's, much too long, in my opinion.
A mini novel.
And it's stuck there on the wall, and you see people sitting there trying to read it. I was also going to mention another of the bills that was discussed today was one that we're going to be talking about in a moment with our guests here. It's a tuition freeze for the next 2 years at North Dakota's public colleges. And that bill is sponsored by Representative Kylie Oversen. She's a Democrat from Grand Forks, a new legislator. She's serving in her first session. And she is a former student body president at the University of North Dakota. And her district, District 42, includes the University of North Dakota.
And she's here. Welcome.
And she's with us, and along with Dr. Larry Skogen, who is the president of Bismarck State College and a former administrator at the New Mexico Military Institute, I believe. He's a native of Hettinger, and he's been the president at BSC for approximately 6 years. And he's here to talk about the bill as well. Representative Oversen, could you were at the hearing today? Could you just explain to us what happened and what were the arguments for and against?
Yep. I can actually only speak to the arguments for, and then I'll explain why.
Okay.
Myself and Logan Fletcher, who's the current student body president, spoke in favor of the bill. Logan's comments were very brief. He just handed out a resolution that our students had passed in favor. And really the idea behind the tuition freeze is just looking at the financing in our state right now and realizing that we're doing pretty well, and that tuition before the previous 4 years had been going up significantly every year. And even though we've capped it the last 2 years, it still has continued to go up. And we thought that this year we could maybe freeze it just for 2 years, give students a break in their tuition. Certainly we don't want to hurt the universities in this. That is not our intention. And as I noted during my testimony today, the appropriation is not included in the bill right now because it was impossible for us to estimate what that number would be to make up the difference because of the funding models being proposed, and the higher education budget, of course, has not been finalized, so we're not sure what that'll be. And then the hearing was closed when I left, and then they had opened it, and Chancellor Shervani had a chance to speak again after I'd left, just by a misunderstanding. And he did speak in opposition to the bill. I wasn't able to be there and hear the reasoning behind it, of course, but I can certainly understand the university system and other universities' concern with the bill. I mean, it's the same discussion we typically have with this.
Dr. Skogen, you might... one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, I'll mention it right now, and I'm sure you would want to follow up on it. The two-year institutions in North Dakota have not been raising their tuition for several years. And so they already, in effect, have a tuition freeze, although it was not mandated by the legislature. The four-year schools, although the four-year schools, they have been raising their tuition within some parameters set by the legislature. This bill that Representative Oversen has introduced would actually freeze tuition for 2 years. Could you just comment on whether you think that this is good policy, and as the president of a two-year school, is this really that important to you because you haven't been raising tuition anyway?
Well, first, before I answer your question, Dale and Scott, I just want you to know that I know you guys know this, but you were talking about Rough Rider Awards.
Yes.
University of Mary is one of your sponsors, and Sister Thomas Welder is a winner.
Another recipient.
Yeah,
Absolutely, a good one. Yeah.
And I know you guys knew that. You just happened to.
And being the heading native, who knows? Dr. Skogen might be next.
No, I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to go that far.
But a good reminder.
Yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there for you guys.
That was very, very generous of you to do that.
Let me just say to begin with is I think that everybody in higher education, I think I can speak for everybody, that we want to keep costs down. That's not an issue. But philosophically, the chancellor and, of course, the president of the state board would be in the best position to talk about this because this is well over my pay grade. But the issue, as you brought out, Dale, is what is the prerogative of the state board and the legislature in this whole process? Is it the state board that sets the rate, or is it the legislatures that set the rate? Our legislature has been so generous to higher education, and of course that means being incredibly generous to the students in the state of North Dakota. I think we can all agree to that. So from maybe either a constitutional or a legal point of view, someone can ask who has that prerogative. I think the state board, and certainly the chancellor articulated that after the representative left, that the board really has that prerogative. Now, for two-year schools, as you've already pointed out, Dale, this has worked magnificently. For the last two bienniums, the state board has proposed that, given the funding, that the two-year tuitions would be frozen. And the legislature has stepped up and has appropriated that money, and so we froze tuitions as you've pointed out, for the last 4 years.
Thank you, Scott. We have with us this evening, we have Representative Chet Pollert, who is the chairman of the House Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the Department of Human Services budget, and also the subject that we're going to be discussing this evening, which is the possible expansion of Medicaid coverage. We have Maggie Anderson, who is the interim director of the Department of Human Services. She succeeded Carol Olson after Carol Olson retired last year. And before she became interim director of the Department of Human Services, she was the director of the Medicaid section. She knows more about Medicaid than most people. And we also have Senator Tim Mathern, a Democrat from Fargo, who is a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, is intimately familiar with the subject we're speaking of tonight. And first of all, I'd like to start with you, Ms. Anderson. Could you explain to us, please, what are we talking about when we talk about the expansion of Medicaid? What is its purpose, and why are we talking about it now?
Sure. The Medicaid expansion was included as part of the Affordable Care Act, and when the Affordable Care Act passed, it was a mandate that all states expand their Medicaid program. And then when the Supreme Court made their decision last June, they said that the expansion was constitutional, but the mandate was not. And so the reason we're talking about it is now the decision is left up to the states as to whether they'll expand their program. And if the state decides to expand its Medicaid program, essentially we would cover all adults under the age of 65, up to 138% of the federal poverty level. And the most notable piece of that is the group that's often referred to as the childless adults would be eligible for Medicaid for the first time.
Who is normally eligible for Medicaid now?
Typically, it's women, pregnant women, children, parents of dependent children, the elderly and disabled comprise, I should say, most of the Medicaid population.
And when we talk about 138% of poverty, what does that mean in terms of a person's income?
For a household of one, that is about $931 a month. And for a household of two, it is about $1,261 a month. And the reason I use 1 and 2 households is that's really the group that we think will benefit from the expansion. It really won't be your households of 3 and 4 people.
Because they are already eligible.
Generally, they have dependent children and they're already eligible.
Senator Mathern, this is a subject that you've been intensely interested in for some time. Could you tell us what is the significance of the choice that the legislature is going to be making here as to whether to expand Medicaid, and if so, who to expand it to?
I think it's historic legislation because it's the first time we're addressing the needs of the hardworking families that are out of the system. You know, we have people that have jobs without health care benefits, and they have children, but their income is such that they aren't eligible for Medicaid, so they don't have care. Right now we have the Affordable Care Act, which is going to give people opportunities to get insurance, and then we have care for the poor. This program is for those people in the middle who don't have those kinds of opportunities, and I think this legislative session, when we have all of these resources, is the prime time, the prime vehicle to expand this coverage to make sure those people are covered.
And how do you think that this will make a dent in the problem of folks going without insurance in North Dakota?
Well, right now we have people that linger on with health care problems that eventually cost more. So these people will get preventative care, will get into receiving that kind of care. We have all kinds of problems, and things like diabetes, hypertension, heart problems. All of those things cost dramatically more if people don't get care early. The other thing this is going to do, which is really important for our state, is this is going to reimburse providers, healthcare providers, doctors, hospitals, and those kinds of providers who basically now provide this care free. And when they provide this care free, they charge that to the payers of health care or those people who have insurance. So we're just transferring health care costs from one group of people to another, but this makes it more transparent, and we know now who is going to get the care, and we won't be transferring this. So it's not just good for individuals that are low income, it's good for providers, and it's good for all of us who have great health care policies, because that care won't go on to our policies.
This is U.S. Representative Kevin Cramer, who was elected this past November. Kevin Cramer is a former state tourism director. He's a former state economic development director. He is a former North Dakota Public Service Commissioner. The Public Service Commission regulates pipelines. They regulate coal mining. They regulate electrical transmission. They regulate auctioneers. They regulate a number of things. And Kevin Cramer was a Public Service Commissioner when he was elected to the U.S. House in November of last year. And he is a new member, and he's at the present time being barraged by emails and phone calls saying, please do not support gun control. One of the things that we'd like to speak with you about, Representative Cramer, is what people are talking about in terms of how they're contacting your office and what they're concerned about. And you gave us a summary of contacts that your office has gotten the last week, and they're overwhelmingly about gun control, specifically opposition to gun control.
They are, and it's surprising to me. Not that it's such a big topic, but how overwhelmingly the people of North Dakota seem to oppose any type of gun control, whether it's assault weapons ban. We get a lot specifically on that. I mean, this week alone, over the 1 week, we monitor it Thursday to Thursday, and then we do the summary at the end of the week. But 807 people from North Dakota contacted my office saying, oppose any bans on weapons or clips. And 18 people called saying support a ban on guns. So clearly the sentiment, and granted there's probably a campaign going on and all of that, but even at that, these are pretty overwhelming numbers. And so...
You wanted to have you're going to have a forum in Fargo on the 22nd of February.
Yes.
About, as I understand it, it's broader than gun control. It's basically an exploration of the causes of violence in our culture.
Yes.
And could you explain
Sure.
what you hope to accomplish with that?
Well, first thing I want to do is I do want to have people who support gun control and who oppose gun control specifically to talk about the issue of guns. I think that, let's have an honest discussion and debate, but let's broaden the discussion, talk to people in the faith community, in the education community, in the culture community, if you will, about things like the impact of movies, television, video games on the culture and on violence. What impact, if any, does that have? What should be done, if anything, about it? What is an appropriate legislative response? I want to talk to family groups and traditional values groups and say, hey, what about this culture of life, culture of death thing? We get ridiculed for it by the very same people who want gun control. Was George Bush onto something when he talked about a culture of life? What did that mean? Have we raised now for 40 years generations of young people who have so little value or value life so little that taking one isn't that big a deal anymore? Right? I think these need to be explored in the public arena without passing judgment. I lean toward that way. Of course, I'm not. I don't want anybody to think I'm undecided on the topic. But at the same time, I do think we ought to hear everybody out.
Is a culture of life promoted by federal regulation or state regulation that does not seek to restrict firearms ownership?
I think no. I think that a culture of life is demeaned by having a culture of death, and a culture of death that I think is exemplified, if you will, illustrated in things like abortion on demand, on the idea of rationing health care. We talk about life as though there are categories of it, and that's going to have a consequence ultimately, in my view. So no, do I believe because abortion's legal, we're going to have murders every day? No, but I do think that we have to have the discussion about the larger cultural issues that might lead to these problems.
I understand what your point is, but I was just thinking, okay, can you support a culture of life and then defend the idea of, well, I really need to own 20 assault rifles with 30 bullet clips in them?
Well, I don't have. It's funny when you say need, because I get to ask that question a lot. What do I really need? 20 clips or 20 bullets in my clip or 50? And I don't pass judgment on what anybody needs. I rather look to the Constitution on what you're entitled to and what the Constitution guarantees in terms of liberty and freedom, and the purpose of it. And I think that's worth exploring. Whether you need it or not really isn't the issue, but whether law-abiding citizens have a right to it is.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious about your first time at the microphone in that historic House well.
Well, you know what I
United
talked
States
about.
House of Representatives. Did you do the NDSU thing? Was that the first one?
I did.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah. I saw that. I didn't know if that was your first.
That was my first.
You went there and waved the flag for North Dakota a little bit.
Yes, I did. In fact, I have a beautiful certificate of the transcript from the congressional record. I need to get over to the university. But you know what happened to me shortly after that, and I've got a couple of speeches. I'm going to do one on the floor in honor of Chet Wrighton next week, but I presided over the House as Speaker of the House right after the debt ceiling vote, and it was a very raucous place, and I had to gavel several people down to get order in the House because there were just a lot of buzz going on, and I thought, well, that's an appropriate way to dive in the deep end.
The other thing I was curious about, Dale went through the statistics of what folks are calling about, and you mentioned how many North Dakotans had called.
Yes.
Do you really only categorize them by, in other words, it only matters when North Dakotans
well,
call?
I wouldn't say it only matters, but that's what I keep track of. Yes, yeah. And it is where most the calls come from, as you might imagine.
And
speaking of culture, what is your impression of the culture of the U.S. House?
I like it. It's a very people would be surprised. They're very normal. Imagine that. Very normal. It's we debate everything. Everything we vote on everything. There's no consent calendar like there is at the Public Service Commission or in the Senate for that matter. It's very rigorous. But by and large, it's a lot of really nice people. But I will tell you though that one of my very early meetings, there was a lot of griping. This was within the Republican conference, and some people were complaining that they don't get to talk to leadership enough. And I was standing right next to Paul Ryan, and I said, Paul, I've never found it difficult to speak to any member of leadership. I call them on the phone, they answer. I go see the speaker, and he talks to me, and I'm talking to you. He said, Kevin, it's the advantage of being from the Midwest. And I thought, wow, that's profound. And I've had freshman members sitting right next to me on the floor saying, I need to go. I have to have a meeting with John Boehner. I said, well, he's right here.
Just go talk to him.
Kevin McCarthy, he's right here.
You don't wait. Go have a conversation. Fascinating.
It's fun.
Another hour of the Legislature Today radio show is in the books. Thanks for listening, folks. For Dale Wetzel, managing editor of Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner, I'm Scott Hennon.